Welcome back. So we are in last part 3 of how to buy your first home here in the UK. Just a recap, the first part, we talk about preparation, where you understand what's your budget, what are the government schemes that you could potentially use. And the second part, we deal with shopping. How do you conduct viewings? How do you understand the seller? And also, how do you make an offer? The third part is the conveyancing process. I always joke that conveyancing here in the UK is a long, drawn out process. And sometimes it's a bit of a black box. You don't know what goes in, you don't know what comes out of it, you don't know when's the end date. Conveyancing, unfortunately, is a necessary step of buying properties here in the UK. Even if you're buying a new build, that's still the case. Conveyancing, meaning, is a process where the legal paperwork are being done by the conveyancer. Conveyancer are solicitors who specialize in properties transaction. So basically, this is a stage where the conveyancer will try to uncover as many stones as possible. Things such as what are the ground rent and service charge, and are you financially able to afford the home? What is your source of fund? They will be doing things such as the KYC, anti-money laundering rule, and so on and so forth. This is also the time where the conveyancer will really uncover some of the liabilities that this property might come with. You might be thinking that you're buying a freehold property and you do not need to pay ground rent or service charge, but there are some freehold properties where there is a rent charge on top of the properties. The rent charge might just be £1 per year, but the mortgage lender will still want to know what is the rent charge. And some mortgage lender will reject the mortgage if there is a rent charge on the property. So a good conveyancer is crucial in this process. Very often I have people asking me, do you have conveyancer that you can recommend? I do have one conveyancer that I could recommend, but they only deal with properties that are more than £5 million and above. For properties less than £5 million and below, very often I'll just advise my friends and clients to go with the conveyancer that's recommended by the estate agent. I know some people will cringe and they say, but isn't this, like there's a lot of like convolution in there, right? Obviously, the conveyancer will help the property agent to get the property transaction speed up. Well, the conveyancer still have certain legal liabilities to do a good job for you and also for the mortgage lender. So even if they are recommended by the estate agent, I don't think they will go to a point where they will collude with the estate agent, at least not that I'm aware of anyway. And also, very often, if the conveyancer is recommended by the estate agent, it means they already have a working relationship. It means they have done a few deals before. So they have that rapport, and that rapport can actually speed things up for you. Especially when conveyancers here in the UK, sometimes they can work a little bit slow just because they have so many cases to handle. Sometimes their response time is not that fast. So if a conveyancer is recommended by the estate agent, you can actually put pressure on the estate agent and you say, hey, would you mind just nudging your conveyancer a little bit? Because it's the estate agent's interest to get the transaction through. So you can use this dynamic and relationship to get things done faster. So the conveyancing process is that's the start of the conveyancing process. The other type of consultants that are needed in the conveyancing process is the surveyor. Generally, people say there are two types of surveyors. The first surveyor is basically just somebody who do the survey report for you. A lot of people didn't realize that surveys are actually not compulsory, because the mortgage lender will do their own surveys. They will send their own surveyor to survey the value of the property. The reason why they will do that is because, just as an example, if you're buying a flat or a house that is £500,000 and you're borrowing £400,000 from the bank will want to make sure the value of the property is at least £400,000, because if it's anything less than £400,000, if they need to liquidate this property, they will be making a loss. So of course, they will appoint a surveyor on their behalf to value the property. On your end, you might want to survey things such as what's the structural soundness of the property if it's a freehold property, or even things such as the electrical wiring, the plumbing, is it sound? Do you have to spend money on, fixing certain things in the property? Or whether there is any, some surveyor could even do things such as asbestos tests and so on, just to make sure there's no nasty surprises when you move into that place. I personally think this process can be skipped. So the survey report, but that's because I'm in the corporate real estate industry. I've seen enough properties. What I personally do, and this is thanks to one of my ex-colleagues who recommended it to me, is to go to TaskRabbit and appoint gas certified plumber and also an electrician. And I will get them, I'll pay them, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours to come to the property to look at the electrical wiring of the property and also the plumbing and radiator of the property. The reason why I get specialist people to come in instead of the surveyor is because very often the surveyors are not specialists. They don't know how to do plumbing. They don't know how to access, electrical wiring and so on. And unfortunately, very often they're also just fresh graduates who are not very well equipped to assess the condition of the property. So I'd rather have experts who can access the properties. And then if they found anything wrong with the property, they can immediately give me a quote and they say, well, I'll ask them, right? If I need to replace this radiator, how much is that going to cost me? And then they can go back and give me a quote. With that quote, I can go back to the seller and say, hey, we discovered that actually your boiler is quite old and it will cost me about £3,000 to replace the boiler. So would you mind if I knock off £3,000 from my offer price? Because this is how much money that's going to cost me. And then you can start a negotiation process with the seller, right? See, this is how I manage to get bargains for my clients. So that's why I say sometimes you have 3 sets of different surveyors in this process. The surveyor, the first one is the one that just generate report for you. Personally, I don't believe in them. The second one is the surveyor sent by the bank to do a survey of the value of the property. And the third one will be the additional survey that you do on your own using gas certified plumber and electricians. If you're buying a freehold property, maybe you need to do some structural survey as well, just to make sure the freehold property is structurally sound. But that's really up to you. Just to caveat that I'm not giving any building, engineering, financial, or legal advices here. This is how I approach it when I bought my properties here in the UK. So that's the surveyor. And then once you've done all of that, you go through this long, drawn out process where you don't know what's going on. You keep chasing your conveyancer, you keep chasing them, and you're saying, when can I move in? Because I'm dying to move in. Your conveyancer just never really give you a date. They might give you a rough estimate. They say 12 weeks, 8 weeks, and so on. But you never really know. 8 weeks might just fly past and then they still don't have any news for you. Unfortunately, this is also the phase where I see a lot of people getting impatient and temper flares up, and people might even just walk away from a perfectly good deal. In 2024, 37% of offers in the UK were gazoom. So gazooming is a very uniquely UK phenomenon. And I personally think the conveyancing process is probably where you see the most gazooming happening, because an offer has been accepted, but people get impatient of moving into this new property, or circumstances change. This is also the point where it's crucial for you to keep in touch with the seller. So remember, in part 2, I mentioned that if you can build up a rapport with your seller, this will really help you with the transaction process. The seller is probably getting impatient as well, because the seller don't know what is going on. If you don't have that direct communication with the seller, very often the seller doesn't know what you're doing, you don't know what the seller is doing. And when people have this information vacuum, they start to fill in this vacuum with the worst case scenario. They go, oh, maybe the seller is gazooming me. Oh, maybe the buyer is gazooming me. So really maintain that relationship with the seller during this process. I would say conveyancing process is generally about 12 weeks. I would say between 3 to 4 months. That's most of the case. With properties that are higher in value, sometimes the conveyancing process is a little bit longer. It can be up to 6 months. You can't really blame the conveyancer for that, because sometimes they will be asking for information from the council, and the council might take a little bit of time. Or sometimes the seller might be overseas, so the seller might not be able to respond as fast, for example. So do be patient with the conveyancer. But when you see that it is necessary to sort of nudge them, just nudge them a little bit so that they can work faster. And if I work with my client on a one-to-one basis, very often I'll step in and manage a conveyancer if the conveyancer is non-responsive. So you might be waiting, you might be getting a little bit impatient, but Vivian is asking you to be patient and just take a deep breath. And one day you receive an email from your conveyancer and say, congratulations, you have an exchange date. Okay, what exactly is an exchange date? Exchange date just means that's the point where you are legally liable to go through with the sale process. Exchange date is where the solicitor will ask for 10% deposit from you and transfer this 10% deposit from you to the seller's solicitor, the seller's conveyancer, who will then transfer this 10% deposit to the seller. And if you decide to walk away from this deal for one reason or another, you lose out on the 10% deposit that your conveyancer has really collected from you. So you're not legally the property owner yet. You're just legally obliged to go through the process. If not, you lose out on the 10% deposit. At the same time, your conveyancer will also be asking you, when would you like to complete? So from the point of exchange to the point of completion is usually 1 week. I have completed on the same single day before. Not unheard of, but quite rare. I would say 1 week is a guideline, and sometimes due to circumstances between the buyer and the seller, it might be up to 4 weeks. It also depends on how many chains are there in this house. I've heard of a case where somebody is buying a house that is in a 7-house chain. And when you're dealing with a 7-house chain, sometimes the owner might be moving to another part of the country, so they need a little time just to coordinate the logistics and all that. So, but I would say generally from exchange to completion, minimum 1 day, generally between 1 to 4 weeks. On completion date, that's where the remaining money is being transferred from your mortgage lender to your solicitor, and then to the seller solicitor, and then to the seller themselves, or to the seller's mortgage lender if the seller has a mortgage lender and they need to pay off the money. This is also when you are the legal owner of the property, and this is also when you can collect keys from the estate agent. So that's the whole process. And massive congratulations for staying with me on this 3-part videos on how to buy your first property here in the UK. I'm so glad you have the patience and the grit to stay till the end. And I just have to say, like, big congratulations. The sensation of owning your first home in the UK is indescribable. I still remember the day when I got my keys to the first flat that I bought here, and I can tell you I couldn't have been more proud. So if you like this video, please click a like and subscribe. And I would love to share more videos about the property markets here in UK, and also what's the difference between things such as freehold, leasehold, new build, second-hand home, and how do you go about shopping for the best property you can get for your budget. So I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Bye!